In the year 1792, as the guillotines of Paris turned the streets red, and the cry of Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité masked a brutal, desperate chaos, there was a secret hidden in the precise, rhythmic ticking of a clock. It was a secret worth more than the life of a king, a secret one 17-year-old boy was about to inherit, a device that didn't just tell time, but could alter the course of it. The scent of pulverized brass and fine-grain oil was the only true constant in the life of Etienne Moreau. It clung to his worn linen shirt, permeated the rough wood of their small atelier in the winding, shadowed streets of the Faubourg Saint-Antoine, and was the ghost of his father's presence. His father, Auguste Moreau, had not been a political man, at least not outwardly. While the air outside crackled with revolutionary fervor, with denunciations, patriotic songs, and the frightening clatter of muskets, Auguste had remained hunched over his bench, a jeweler's loupe pressed to his eye, obsessed with the purest, most esoteric form of control, the mastery of time. It was the summer of 1792. The revolution, once a glorious, hopeful dawn, had devolved into the terror's gruesome prelude. King Louis XVI and his Austrian queen were prisoners in the Temple, and the citizens of Paris, intoxicated by a mixture of ideological zeal and survival panic, were turning on one another. The very ground felt volatile, vibrating with the roar of the populace. Etienne, 17, with the lanky frame of a boy still growing, and the haunted eyes of a man who had seen too much, was sweeping up a mess of microscopic brass shavings. Etienne, his mother, Celeste, whispered, her voice a thin, brittle thing that sounded perpetually on the verge of shattering. She stood framed in the narrow doorway of their living quarters, the meager candlelight outlining her face. The section committee. They are calling for all men. They demand contributions. Not just coins, but service, and they are asking about the royal patents. Etienne's hand froze above the scattered filings. The mention of royal patents was a cold hand on his throat. His father, like the most talented artisans in Paris, had once taken commissions from the deposed aristocracy. That association was now a death warrant, a scarlet letter in a city that worshipped the tricolor. Etienne's father made public declarations of support for the Republic, Mama, I said, trying to sound more assured than he felt. He delivered 2 of the clocks we finished to the new Hôtel de Ville as a gift to the National Guard. Everyone saw it. They don't care about clocks, mon cher. They care about loyalty, and they care about secrets, and they know Auguste kept a great secret. Celeste stepped fully into the workshop and approached the centerpiece of the room, a large, heavy oak chest in the corner, chained and padlocked with 3 separate mechanisms. This was not the securement for the usual precious metals or gems. This chest held only one thing, the chronometer of fate. Etienne's father had spent the last 5 years on this singular device. It wasn't a clock meant to be sold to a wealthy patron. It was a dense, intricate sphere of polished steel and interlocking bronze gears, far too complex, far too personal to ever leave the workshop. Auguste had described it only in maddeningly vague terms. It is a chronometer, Etienne, but one that tracks not the hour of the day, but the hour of cause and effect. 3 days ago, Auguste Moreau had vanished. He had simply not come home from a routine visit to a metal supplier near the Pont Neuf. No arrest, no public denunciation, just an eerie, absolute silence. Etienne knew the common wisdom. Anyone who simply vanished in Paris now was likely either already buried in an unmarked pit or detained in the grim, overcrowded prisons awaiting the revolutionary tribunal. Celeste walked to the workbench and lifted a small velvet-lined box. Inside lay a single heavy brass key, intricately cut, the key to the central padlock on the chest. "He left this," Celeste said, her voice shaking now. in the hidden cavity of his favorite regulator clock. He said, "If I am gone for 3 days, Etienne must open the chest, not before. He will know the danger. He will know the value." "But he told me never to touch the chest," he argued, his brow furrowed. "He said even looking at the schematics was dangerous. He warned me that the mathematics of time are the mathematics of God, and men who trifle with them pay the price in blood." "You are no longer a boy, Etienne. You are a man, and the clockmaker's son. And the greater price may be paid by the nation if you do not." Celeste's sudden, quiet intensity extinguished any lingering doubt. He took the heavy, cold key from her hand. It felt like the weight of an era. He approached the chest. He could hear the faint, low hum from inside, a sound that had been a constant background noise in his life, but which now sounded like a subdued, rhythmic heartbeat. The first 2 padlocks, ordinary steel, gave way with a satisfying, familiar click from the spare keys his father kept. The final lock, the heavy brass one, was different. It had a unique, ornate keyhole. Etienne carefully inserted the key. It slid in smoothly. The mechanism didn't click. It sang. It was a delicate, high-pitched whirring that lasted for a full 3 seconds, and then with a heavy thud, the brass lock sprang open. Etienne lifted the lid of the chest. Inside, nestled in dark velvet, was the device. It was breathtaking. The chronometer was about the size of a small globe, but rather than geographical lines, its surface was a swirling, bewildering tapestry of gears and interlocking linkages. Its metal was not gold or silver, but an unfamiliar pale alloy that shimmered with an internal, cool light, as if drawing energy from the very air. At the equator of the device, a circle of fine script was engraved. It was Latin, a language few revolutionary Parisians bothered with. Etienne, who had been tutored by an old priest who had now fled the city, could translate the key phrase: "Non praeteritum, non futurum, solum presentes." Not past, not future, only present. As Etienne reached out to touch the cool metal, he noticed something his father had never shown him. Tucked beneath the sphere was a thin packet of papers, held together with a faded ribbon. These were the blueprints and the accompanying journal, the factual core of his father's work. He quickly grabbed the journal and began to read the last entry, scribbled in Auguste's frantic, familiar hand. August 8th, 1792. The section is closing in. They do not understand the chronometer. They only understand its power. They believe it can reveal the location of every royalist plot. If they knew the truth, that it can reveal the nexus points of history, the brief, volatile moments where a small change can create an epoch-spanning cascade, they would not merely execute me, they would bisect my mind. The chronometer is built on the mathematics of the butterfly effect, the science of interconnected causality. I have calculated the most critical nexus point remaining in the revolution, the September massacres. If the chronometer is activated precisely 3 hours before the massacres begin, it will project a single, specific counter-causality to the designated target, a small, unavoidable truth that will divert the momentum of the terror. It is a one-time shot. The target is the Girondin deputy, Charles L'Enfant. Etienne, my son, you must take the device to the hidden tunnel, the one beneath the fountain in the Cour des Mailles, and activate it there. The code sequence is the birthday of your mother. Adieu, mon fils. May the hour of your life be true.
Etienne's mind reeled. The September massacres, a horrifying, inevitable event where mobs, fearing a royalist counter-revolution, would storm the prisons and execute thousands of suspected enemies. It was the moment the revolution would bleed beyond the point of redemption. And his father had built a machine to stop it. But Charles Danton was not a Girondin. He was the fearsome, towering leader of the Cordeliers Club, a radical Jacobin and one of the revolution's most powerful men. His father must have used a pseudonym. Before Etienne could process the immense implications of the journal, that the invention was not a clock, but a tool for subtle, targeted manipulation of historical events, there was a hammering on the workshop door. It wasn't the tentative rap of a customer, it was the brutal, rhythmic thud of a musket butt. "Open up, citizens! By decree of the section, we require entry. We know the royalist clockmaker hid something here," a harsh voice bellowed from the street. Etienne looked at his mother, the cool light of the chronometer reflecting in her terrified eyes. "The time is now, Etienne," she said, pushing him toward the back window, which led onto a narrow, rubbish-strewn alley. "Take the chronometer and the journal. Go to the corps d'armée. I will slow them." "Mama! No! They'll—" "She have no secrets they want, mon cher. You do. Go. Save your father's work. Save everything." The door splintered on its hinges with a tremendous crack. Etienne didn't wait. He quickly wrapped the heavy, humming sphere in a thick piece of canvas, tucked the journal into his waistband, and scrambled through the window. As he dropped into the alley, the angry shouts of the Revolutionary Guards, men wearing the cockade and bearing the awful muskets of the National Guard, echoed from the workshop. "He's escaping! Stop him! The boy has the device!" Etienne Moreau, the clockmaker's son, ran. He ran not just from the guards and the terror, but toward a destiny that promised to rewrite the very minutes of history. He carried in his arms a device of incredible scientific precision, an invention centuries ahead of its time, conceived not by political ambition, but by a father's obsessive love for the perfect mechanism, a mechanism that now held the fate of the French Revolution and perhaps the future of America's young democratic experiment in its delicate, vibrating heart. The alley Etienne dropped into was a narrow, fetid channel of overflowing refuse and shadow, a perfect hiding place for a moment, but a dead end if he lingered. He could hear the heavy boots of the guards, members of the National Guard, scrambling to exit the workshop through the front door, their shouts echoing his name. "Moreau, stop in the name of the Republic!" He clutched the canvas-wrapped chronometer tightly to his chest. It was deceptively heavy, a dense knot of unfamiliar alloys, and the faint internal hum of its mechanism vibrated against his ribs. It felt less like a machine and more like a captured spirit. His destination, the Corps d'Armée, was a long, perilous distance away, across the heart of the turbulent Faubourg Saint-Antoine, a district renowned for its revolutionary fervor and suspicion of the wealthy and the skilled elite, like clockmakers. Etienne plunged down the alley, his eyes constantly scanning the high, soot-stained walls for escape. He was a creature of the workshop, not the streets, and every shadow seemed to hold a lurking danger. He rounded a corner and found himself face to face with a drunken sans-culotte, a working-class radical known by his distinctive long trousers or pantalon instead of the aristocratic knee breeches. The man, wielding a rusty pike, stared blankly at Etienne, then at the heavy bundle he carried. "Eh, young citizen, what precious treasure do you hide from the people?" the man slurred, blocking the passage. Thinking fast, Etienne adopted the revolutionary vernacular, a skill learned simply by living in Paris. "1,000 pardons, citizen. I carry a mechanism for the section, a new clock dedicated to the prompt hour of justice. Urgent, by decree." The man squinted at the bundle. The light alloy of the chronometer shimmered faintly through the thin canvas, giving the impression of polished steel. The sans-culotte, already half blinded by cheap wine, seemed to accept the grand-sounding but vague explanation. "Justice," he muttered, nodding sagely. "A fine thing. See that you hurry, citizen. Time waits for no man, least of all a traitor." He staggered aside. Etienne slipped past, his heart pounding a furious rhythm against the very device designed to control time. The encounter was a brutal reminder. In this Paris, the right words were often more powerful than a sword, but the wrong words were instantly fatal. The architect of chaos. He knew he couldn't reach the Corps d'Armée via the main thoroughfares. The section's patrols would be everywhere, alerted by his mother's brave, futile efforts to slow them. He needed the labyrinthine side streets and the hidden passages that only the long-time residents of Saint-Antoine knew. He ducked into an entrance marked for a communal laundry, squeezing past damp hanging linens and into a tight courtyard. There, he risked a moment to catch his breath and reread the crucial passage in his father's journal, which he had now tucked securely into his coat. The target is the Girondin deputy, Charles Danton. Etienne finally understood the urgency and the necessity of his father's deception. Georges Danton, the true leader of the Cordeliers Club, was one of the most vociferous proponents of the Terror. If his father had written the real name, and the journal fell into the wrong hands, the device would have been aimed not at the September massacres, but at Danton himself, an act of assassination by temporal mechanics that would have guaranteed the clockmaker's immediate execution. Auguste had used the name Charles Danton as a simple phonetic cipher, confusing the official name with the faction he despised. The journal went on to explain the operational mechanics of the chronometer, written in a dense mixture of Newton's physics and something else, a calculus Etienne didn't recognize, filled with symbols for infinity and probability. The chronometer is not a time machine. It is a causality projector. Its power lies in its ability to isolate a crucial, volatile moment, a nexus point, and project a perfectly timed, single minor informational event, the counter-causality, to directly into the consciousness of a designated observer, the target. The counter-causality is formulated to exploit the target's existing psychological profile, forcing a moment of doubt, distraction, or insight that subtly diverts their immediate intended action. The sheer audacity of the concept made Etienne dizzy. His father hadn't just built a clock. He'd built a device that could whisper the perfect distracting thought into the mind of a powerful man at the moment of his greatest influence.
The counter-causality his father had set was designed to hit Danton just as he was about to give the infamous speech that would incite the prison's storming. What specific thought would stop the terror? The journal didn't say, only that the calculations were perfectly tuned to Danton's fear of his own mortality and the stain on his legacy. The rendezvous at the fountain. Etienne emerged onto a main street just as a cart loaded with firewood rumbled past, heading toward the Bastille, now a massive open space where the fortress once stood, a symbol of the revolution's destructive power. He spotted a patrol of National Guardsmen at the end of the street, checking papers. His moment of opportunity was now. He sprinted alongside the firewood cart, using the towering logs as cover. The weight of the chronometer was starting to make his arms ache, and the canvas was slipping. Just as he cleared the cart, a guard spotted the movement. "Halt! You there, boy!" Etienne ignored him, turning down a narrow passage that led directly into the Cour de Mai, the main square of the Bastille neighborhood. It was bustling, a marketplace, a revolutionary meeting point, and now his father's final sanctuary. In the center of the Cour stood a grand temporary fountain erected by the revolutionaries, a massive statue of the Goddess of Liberty holding a torch with water pouring from a broken chain. Etienne knew the area well. Beneath the fountain, his father had mentioned, was a forgotten sewer tunnel access dating back to the monarchy's construction projects, now hidden by a skillfully carved stone slab. He reached the base of the fountain and began circling, his eyes desperately seeking the disguised entrance. "Citizen, I said halt!" The guard was close, his heavy breathing audible. Etienne finally located it, a seemingly ordinary piece of pavement stone near the water's edge that was slightly sunken. It was almost invisible. He dropped the chronometer and placed his hands on the stone, praying. He didn't have a lever. A sudden distraction. A small girl, no older than 5, running from a merchant who had caught her pocketing a piece of fruit, ran directly into the approaching guard, causing him to stumble and drop his musket. It was a priceless, unexpected gift of chance. In that brief, essential second of chaos, Etienne pulled with all his strength. The stone slab groaned, its edge grating against the pavement, but it moved, revealing a dark, damp opening that smelled of earth and old stone. He snatched up the chronometer, carefully lowered himself into the dark aperture, and pulled the heavy stone slab back into place above his head, plunging himself into absolute darkness. He was in the tunnel. He was alone. The frantic shouts of the guard above faded into a dull echo, replaced by the persistent rhythmic thump, thump, thump of the chronometer. Etienne was now deep beneath the streets of revolutionary Paris, in a place only he and his father knew, holding the device that could either save the revolution from itself or unleash an irreversible catastrophe. He had to follow his father's code and activate the chronometer before the dawn of the September massacres changed the world forever. The weight of the chronometer felt like the weight of every future moment. The sewer tunnel was a claustrophobic cage of damp rock and mud. Etienne fumbled for a tinderbox and after a few frantic strikes managed to light a stub of a stolen candle. The flickering light revealed the tunnel's true nature, a forgotten inspection passage, barely large enough to kneel in, running beneath the old walls of the Bastille grounds. He unwrapped the chronometer of fate. In the candlelight, the alloy shimmered with an almost liquid grace. The constant, rapid thump, thump, thump was more pronounced down here, echoing off the stone. It was the sound of its internal oscillator, a core mechanism that Etienne knew maintained near-perfect accuracy, defying the limitations of contemporary clockmaking. He consulted his father's journal for the activation sequence. The details were maddeningly specific. To initiate the causality projection, the chronometer must be set to the precise minute of the nexus point, the speech by Danton on the afternoon of September 2nd, and the counter-causality code must be entered. The code is the birth date of Celeste, using the old regime's calendar format, DDMMYY, and entered as a specific rotational sequence on the 3 primary calibration rings. Etienne pulled out the chronometer and examined its complex face. It wasn't flat like a clock. It was spherical. 3 concentric engraved rings circled the equator. They were the calibration rings, the outer ring for the day, the middle ring for the month, and the inner ring for the year. His mother's birthday was October 14th, 1755. The code was 14-10-55. Etienne's fingers, usually steady from years of working with microgears, trembled with the sheer weight of consequence. He was about to manipulate the very fabric of historical momentum. First, the outer day ring, 14. He carefully rotated the ring. It moved with the smoothness of oiled silk, clicking 14 times. Second, the middle month ring, 10 for October. He rotated it 10 times. Finally, the inner year ring, 55. He had to rotate it forward 55 clicks. As he neared the end of the sequence, the chronometer began to emit a high-pitched harmonic whine. The vibrations intensified, making his teeth ache. On the final 55th click, the whine instantly cut out. The chronometer did not click, tick, or hum. It became perfectly, terrifyingly silent. Then the true nature of the device revealed itself. The pale alloy of the sphere began to glow a vibrant, intense azure blue. Internal structures, the tiny gears and linkages, which had been almost invisible, now shone with captured light. The sphere seemed to be spinning internally, an impossible movement that defied physical constraint. At the top of the sphere, a minuscule diamond-tipped needle emerged from the casing and began to dance wildly. Etienne knew this was the causality sensor, now scanning the flow of local time and history, searching for the pre-programmed nexus point.
He looked at his father's journal again.
finding the final instruction. The projection will be initiated automatically when the sensor detects the designated nexus point. Do not touch the chronometer until the blue light fades. The immediate energy displacement will be volatile. The historical nexus, September 2, 1792. The date his father had calibrated the device for, September 2, 1792, was not merely a date. It was the hinge upon which the revolution swung from idealistic upheaval to murderous terror. The day began with news of the siege of Verdun, with the Austrian and Prussian armies advancing rapidly and Paris seemingly exposed. Fear of a royalist conspiracy, a plot by the prisoners, mostly priests, nobles, and Swiss guards, to break out and aid the invaders consumed the city. It was this potent mixture of patriotic panic and paranoia that Georges Danton, the charismatic and brutal Minister of Justice, was poised to exploit. His speech to the Legislative Assembly that afternoon was not just rhetoric, it was a psychological trigger. He would declare, "The tocsin that rings is not an alarm signal. It sounds the charge against the enemies of the fatherland. To conquer them we need audacity, more audacity, always audacity, and France is saved." This was the signal. Within hours, frenzied mobs would swarm the city's prisons, La Force, the Abbaye, the Conciergerie, and begin the systematic execution of nearly 1,400 inmates. This, Etienne realized with horrifying clarity, was the moment the chronometer was designed to interrupt. His father had positioned his device, hidden beneath the ground, aimed like a temporal cannon at the very center of power. The ripple effect. Etienne waited, shivering in the damp cold, the intense azure glow illuminating the grime of the tunnel. Minutes stretched into an eternity. He listened to the faint, muffled sounds of the street above, the shouts of merchants, the heavy roll of carriage wheels, the distant, angry cadence of revolutionary marching songs. Suddenly, the chronometer's glow intensified, pulsing 3 times like a massive, silent heart, and then, with a sharp, silent flash that left spots in Etienne's vision, the blue light vanished. The sphere returned to its normal, pale, metallic sheen, and the causality sensor retracted, and the chronometer began to hum its familiar rhythmic thump once more. It was done. The counter-causality had been projected. Etienne scrambled out of the tunnel, heart racing, and emerged onto the Cour de Mai. He covered the chronometer and hid it under a pile of canvas scraps left behind by a street vendor. The square felt different. The crowd was still immense, but the mood was shifted. Instead of the tense, violent air he had expected, the low, dangerous roar that preceded a riot, the crowd seemed confused, milling about in small, agitated knots, debating rather than marching. Etienne cautiously approached a small group clustered around a man reading a freshly printed leaflet. "What is happening?" Etienne asked a nearby woman, who was clutching a tricolor flag. "What is happening?" "The call to action, Danton's speech." The woman frowned, her expression one of baffled fury. It was nothing, citizen. We expected the call to arms, the fire. But Danton, the great Danton, stood before the assembly and he was struck with doubt." "Doubt? What did he say?" "He spoke of audacity, yes, but then he halted, mid-sentence. He spent a full minute staring at his own hands, then began muttering strange things about the fragility of memory and the unforeseen future of the innocent. He said that the justice of the moment must not become the regret of the age. He then ordered the National Guard to redouble their prison protection, not to call the citizens to arms. The man lost his nerve." Etienne gasped, staggering back a step. The counter-causality had worked. It had played on Danton's subconscious fear of how history would judge his legacy. Danton hadn't called for massacre. He had called for protection. The nexus point had been diverted. The September massacres, the bloody tide that defined the terror, were prevented. A wave of triumph mixed with utter dread washed over Etienne. His father had succeeded. But then, the true horror of manipulating cause and effect manifested. From the northern end of the street, a new sound began to rise, not the disorganized shout of a mob, but the terrifyingly organized drumbeat of an army. A column of soldiers, fully armed and wearing the distinct uniforms of the Paris Commune, a rival, more radical authority to the Legislative Assembly, marched directly into the Corps de Mai. They were not confused, they were purposeful. Their leader, a minor but highly ambitious political agitator named Collot d'Herbois, stood atop a cart. He was shouting, his voice shrill with manufactured outrage.
Citizens, Danton has betrayed the revolution. He is a moderate, a coward. The royalists are plotting their escape, and Danton has left them armed and waiting. There is no time for doubt. The patrie is in danger. The Commune calls upon the true patriots to follow me. To the prisons. Audacity, more audacity, always audacity. The words were almost precisely Danton's intended rhetoric, but spoken by a different man, fueled by a different, darker political engine. Etienne's triumph evaporated. His father's calculations had been perfect for Danton, the designated target, but by incapacitating the powerful leader, the chronometer had simply created a power vacuum. A new, perhaps even more ruthless figure had stepped forward to seize the moment. The chronometer had not stopped the terror, it had merely accelerated it, putting control into the hands of a more extreme faction. The massacre was still happening, it was just starting sooner, and with a different, more politically motivated leadership. Etienne looked down at the chronometer, now just a silent, shimmering sphere in his hands. It wasn't a tool of salvation. It was a deadly, unpredictable force multiplier. His father's invention hadn't changed history for the better. It had merely broken it. He had to get out of Paris now. With the Commune seizing power, the border would soon be sealed, and his mother's fate would be sealed with it. His father's final calculations had been flawed, and now Etienne had to find a way to fix the broken arc of time, a way that led far from the chaos of France, to a place where democracy was still an experiment, and where the chronometer could not be misused, the newly formed United States of America. The drumbeats were closer now, a chilling, quickened tempo that signaled the march of politically sanctioned murder. Etienne knew he had only minutes before the Commune's rabble, now inflamed and directed by Collot d'Herbois, descended upon the Cour de Mai en route to the prisons. His failed intervention had not saved Paris, it had merely changed the conductor of the bloody symphony. He snatched the chronometer and the journal, wrapping them securely, and fled the square, heading southeast toward the Jardin des Plantes. He needed to reach the old quarter near the river, where the docks and the shadow economy still operated despite the revolutionary fervor. He ran for his mother, Celeste. He had to assume the guards who had burst into their atelier were now searching the district for him. If they hadn't arrested Celeste outright, they would be using her to lure him back. He couldn't risk returning. He had to get to the rendezvous point his father had established for the direst emergencies, La Péniche Royale. The Péniche Royale was a derelict barge moored on the Seine near the Pont d'Austerlitz, ironically named for its former purpose as a pleasure cruiser for minor nobles. It was now a known drop-off point for those needing illegal passage out of France. As Etienne reached the quays, the air was thick with smoke, and the ringing of the tocsin, the church bell signaling general alarm, was deafening. He saw the first signs of the escalating violence, a wagon overturned, citizens fighting over stolen goods, and the chilling spectacle of men sharpening long blades on the curbs. The city was unraveling. He found the barge easily, its dark, rotting timbers blending into the river fog. He scrambled aboard, dropping into the dark hold. "Who is there? State your purpose," a voice growled from the darkness, a deep, thick accent of a Breton sailor. "I seek the passage. The code is, the hour is constant, but the minute is fate," Etienne whispered, using the archaic phrase his father had taught him. A huge figure materialized, carrying a dim lantern. It was the barge master, a man named Gaspard, whose face was scarred and weather-beaten like old leather. He recognized the look in Etienne's eyes, the look of a man running for his life. "Moreau's boy," Gaspard rumbled, recognizing the key phrase. "I feared you would be too late. Your father paid me a substantial sum, half in gold and half in precise measurements for a marine chronometer, 2 weeks ago. He foresaw this. He said you would arrive with the sphere. Is it safe?" Etienne carefully unwrapped the chronometer. Gaspard's eyes, despite their roughness, widened at the sight of the azure-pale alloy. He didn't ask what it did, he only registered its value. "Passage is to Le Havre. From there, a ship sails in 3 days for the Delaware River, Philadelphia. Your father was very specific. He said the invention must leave French soil immediately." "My mother, Celeste," Etienne pleaded, his voice cracking. "Is there any word? She was at the workshop." Gaspard shook his head, looking away. "No word, but the guards were quick. If she is not here, you must assume the worst. They will use her to find you. You must assume the duty is only to the device and to your own survival. That is what your father paid for." The brutal honesty cut deeper than any dagger. Etienne knew Gaspard was right. Returning to search for his mother would only lead the National Guard to the chronometer. He was now alone, the keeper of his father's dangerous, world-altering legacy. The journey across the sea. The passage from Paris was harrowing, hidden between sacks of salted fish and enduring the stench and fear. By the time he reached the coast at Le Havre, the news of the September massacres had spread, its scale made worse by the Commune's zealous efficiency. The ripple effect was clear. The terror had begun not with Danton's reluctant sanction, but with Colonne d'Herrois' immediate call for action. Etienne boarded the American brigantine, the Liberty's Dawn, bound for the United States. He spent the entire 40-day voyage in the cramped, humid forecastle, consumed by his father's journal. He began to understand the temporal calculus behind the chronometer. The universe, his father wrote, was not a deterministic machine, but a quantum fabric of possibilities. The chronometer's power lay in identifying the probability wave collapses, the critical moments when multiple futures converge into one certainty, the nexus point. By introducing a small informational counter-causality, one could effectively force the wave to collapse in a different, unintended direction. He discovered the device's greatest flaw, the one his father had warned him about in his earlier notes: momentum recoil. Any use of the causality projector requires a tremendous expenditure of the localized historical momentum. The moment that momentum is diverted, it must immediately find a new, often more volatile path. The redirection is always less predictable than the initial state. Etienne's act hadn't saved the victims. It had merely allowed the terror to gather more momentum and find a more radical agent. He realized the danger of the chronometer was not that it could change history, but that it was a tool of amplification. In the chaotic political environment of France, it only amplified the chaos. His father's journal concluded with a plea: "Etienne, the chronometer must be taken to the one place whose causality is still malleable and unhardened: the American Republic. It is a nascent state, its future still unwritten, its institutions still struggling for definition. It requires stability. The chronometer can be reprogrammed, but it must be applied only once to a specific political nexus point, not to incite, but to firmly anchor the nation's democratic foundations. Seek out Thomas Jefferson.
He is a philosopher of time, a clockmaker of the nation. He will understand the danger of the mechanism and the necessary moment of its last use. Etienne looked up from the journal, the salty Atlantic wind whipping across the deck. Thomas Jefferson, the principal author of the Declaration of Independence, a renowned scientist, inventor, and a former ambassador to France. He was currently serving as the U.S. Secretary of State. His father's ultimate goal was not to save France, but to use the chronometer to secure the world's greatest democratic experiment, safeguarding its future against the kind of internal collapse that had consumed his homeland. The chronometer, the vessel of French ingenuity, was destined to secure the future of American stability. Chapter 5. The Shores of a New Republic. The Liberty's dawn arrived in Philadelphia in early October 1792. The city was the temporary capital of the United States, a vibrant, bustling hub of commerce and political debate, a stark and hopeful contrast to the blood-drenched gloom of Paris. Etienne stepped onto the docks of the Delaware River, the chronometer hidden beneath his coat. The air here was cleaner. The noise was of industry and commerce, not revolutionary rage. The American citizens he saw were preoccupied with land deals, tariffs, and elections, not executions. He found lodgings in a modest rooming house near the State House, later Independence Hall. His few gold coins bought him anonymity, but his immediate goal was fraught with danger: finding Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson, the Secretary of State, was embroiled in the bitter, foundational political struggle of the new nation, the clash between his own Democratic Republicans, who favored agrarianism and states' rights, and Alexander Hamilton's Federalists, who favored strong central government and industrial development. Etienne knew he couldn't simply walk up to the Secretary of State. He needed an introduction. He remembered a detail from his father's notes. Auguste had been commissioned to create a small astronomical clock for a renowned American scientist, Dr. Benjamin Rush, a leading physician, abolitionist, and a signer of the Declaration of Independence. The following day, Etienne, wearing his best but threadbare Parisian clothes, stood nervously before Dr. Rush's prominent Philadelphia townhouse. He presented himself as the son of Auguste Moreau, the celebrated horloger, and offered Dr. Rush the final, intricate winding key for the clock his father had sent years earlier. The key was the authenticating token. Dr. Rush, a distinguished man with sharp, discerning eyes, invited Etienne inside immediately. "Moreau's son, come in, young man. Your father's artistry is the finest I've ever seen. But you look troubled, and you have come a great distance," Dr. Rush noted, his physician's instincts detecting the young man's anxiety. Etienne took a deep breath. He couldn't speak of a causality projector, of altered timelines or momentum recoil. He had to translate his impossible scientific reality into a political truth. "Sir, I have brought an invention of my father. It is a device of immense power and precision, far beyond any chronometer. It was intended to stabilize France, but in the wrong hands it only accelerates chaos. I have witnessed its potential for irreversible destruction." He unwrapped the chronometer, placing the faintly humming sphere on Dr. Rush's mahogany desk. The pale alloy and the density of the mechanism captivated the doctor. "This is not merely a clock, Dr. Rush," Etienne continued. "It is, politically speaking, a perfect weapon of influence. My father believed it must be used one last time, not to change events, but to secure the American idea. He directed me to seek Secretary Jefferson. He believes Mr. Jefferson, with his philosophical mind, will know the exact single moment, the nexus point, to activate it not for rebellion,
but for unification. Dr. Rush stared at the device, then at the desperate, exhausted young Frenchman. He had an instant gut-level sense that this young man was telling a profound truth. The invention, whatever its true nature, was clearly a matter of national security. Thomas Jefferson is currently at his post, struggling with the bitter attacks of the Federalists and trying to guide the Congress toward the funding for the First National Bank, Dr. Rush said slowly, tapping his finger on the desk. But this is beyond politics. I will arrange the meeting, Etienne. But I warn you, the American political landscape is a minefield. You have escaped the guillotine in France only to enter the court of political espionage here. Your device will attract far more than just philosophers. Etienne nodded, his fear tempered by relief. He had made contact, but the danger was far from over. Alexander Hamilton and the Federalists were wary of all things French and all things that threatened their centralizing vision of government. If they learned that a young Frenchman was delivering a mysterious, powerful device of influence to their chief rival, Thomas Jefferson, they would stop at nothing to seize it. Etienne had brought the chronometer of fate to the heart of the American political struggle, and the next moment of truth for the young republic would be determined by the precision of a French clockmaker's final, desperate calculation.
This is the continuation of The Clockmaker's Son, The Chronometer of Fate. Chapter 6, The Scholar of Time. Dr. Benjamin Rush moved quickly and discreetly. The very next evening, Etienne found himself being ushered through the back entrance of the temporary presidential residence in Philadelphia, a modest mansion that served as the home of President George Washington. However, their destination was the nearby office of the Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson. The room was a world away from the dusty, chaotic workshops of Paris. It was lined with shelves of meticulously organized books and scientific instruments. Maps covered one wall, and on a side table, Etienne noted a beautiful, complex astronomical clock, Jefferson's own handiwork. Thomas Jefferson, tall and slender, with striking red hair that was beginning to fade, rose to greet them. His demeanor was reserved, scholarly, and immediately commanding. Dr. Rush assures me, Monsieur Mauveau, that you bring a matter of immense gravity, relating both to the science of horology and the fate of nations, Jefferson said, his French being excellent, honed during his years as minister to France. Etienne unwrapped the chronometer, placing the sphere on Jefferson's desk. The pale, luminous alloy seemed to absorb the candlelight, giving off a soft, internal sheen. This, Mr. Secretary, is the chronometer of fate. My father created it. It is not merely a clock. It is a device to target and subtly alter the causality of a critical historical moment, a nexus point. Etienne quickly, desperately explained the concept of temporal calculus, the counter-causality, and the disastrous momentum recoil in Paris. He omitted the name Danton, fearing the political implications, but described the outcome, the acceleration of the terror, and the rise of a more ruthless faction. Jefferson did not interrupt. He picked up the chronometer, his long fingers tracing the intricate microscopic gears, his eyes bright with intellectual curiosity, not simple greed or fear. A fascinating hypothesis, young man. You're suggesting this device introduced a calculated psychological flaw into the historical momentum, and that the resulting vacuum was filled by a greater, uncontrolled energy, Jefferson mused. He placed the chronometer down, looking Etienne directly in the eye. Your father believed, Mr. Secretary, that the great danger of the chronometer is in a chaotic system, like revolutionary France. But he believed that in a nascent, still forming system, like the American Republic, It could be used once last time to anchor its foundation, to prevent the inevitable fracture. Etienne pulled the journal from his coat, flipping to the final entry. My father instructs me to give this to you. He believed you would know the correct nexus point, the moment of greatest vulnerability for the American system, where a single, stabilizing thought could prevent civil rupture. Jefferson's expression hardened with the weight of responsibility. He was intimately aware of the fault lines threatening the new Union, the fierce battle over Hamilton's centralized financial plan, the regional tensions over slavery, and the ideological split between the Federalists and his own Republicans. The nation was still an infant, fragile and prone to fever. There is indeed a moment of profound vulnerability approaching, Monsieur Moreau, Jefferson said slowly, his eyes distant as he contemplated the American future. A point of stress that, if it fails, could collapse the entire democratic structure. And your father's device? Etienne asked, his voice barely a whisper. The device must not influence the rebels. It must influence the commander-in-chief, Jefferson declared. The only person whose decision in that moment will carry the necessary national weight and whose authority will be respected by all sides is President Washington. The plan was audacious, to use the chronometer to subtly influence the decision-making of the first President of the United States during the greatest constitutional crisis of his tenure. I need time to calculate the precise counter-causality, Jefferson stated, taking the journal. I must study your father's mathematics and Washington's own psyche. The message cannot be a specific command. It must be a moral certainty that steers him toward a path of authority tempered by conciliation. Chapter 8. The Shadow of the Spy. The very next morning, Etienne's world of scholarly calculation violently collided with the world of realpolitik and espionage.